My name is Ronan, and this is my book, Young Fiona. Small Kid, Big Legend, published by Gill Books. Now, as you might guess from the title Young Fiona, this book is about perhaps Ireland's most famous and legendary warrior, Fiona Mccool. And the stories in it are drawn from an ancient Irish text. There are 8 tales in total that tell the tale of young Fiona from when his parents meet to him challenging to become head of the famous fighting group, Fiona. If you don't know much about Fiona Mccool, let me tell you a little bit about her. In ancient times, Ireland was ruled by the Celts, a race of people who lived in a land of myths and legends, warriors and druids, monsters and magic. Many extraordinary and epic events took place during the period in which the Celts lived. But over the hundreds and hundreds of years that followed, many of these tales were lost to the mists of time. However, some stories have survived. The most famous of these are the tales of Fiona Mccool and the Fiona, a mighty band of warriors that fought on behalf of the High King, who was responsible for protecting the people of Ireland. How Fiona succeeded in becoming the leader of the most famous band of Fiona to have ever lived is a tale of love and loss, war and revenge, family and friendship, and a young boy with a warrior's heart. Now, of course, the main character of this book is Fiona Mccool, but it's important to remember that in Celtic times, girls and women played very important roles. Not only were they sisters and mothers and wives, they were also warriors and rulers. And in this first extract I'd like to read you out, from the very beginning of the story, is a tale about one of those young women, Myrna, who would later become the mother of Fiona Mccool. Myrna, my dear, my little daughter, my little darling, Myrna. The calls of the chief Druid resounded through the palace. He'd been looking for Myrna all morning. She was probably getting up to no good in the forbidden forest, Tig thought to himself. He was determined to put an end to her free-spirited ways. That night, in the palace of Almu, on the plains of Kildare, he would hold a great feast of Sauron to celebrate the end of the harvest season. And to this feast he had invited the wealthiest men in all of Ireland. One of these men would marry his daughter, and he would be finally rid of her. As the sound of his footsteps disappeared down the corridor, away from her room, his fair-haired daughter, Myrna, crept out from beneath the pile of cloaks in the corner. She didn't like her father. In fact, she hated him. He was mean and cruel and treated her terribly. Tig only called Myrna his lovely daughter when he wanted something, and today he wanted her to marry, which she had only found out about this morning. Knowing that Tig might soon return, Myrna wasted no time in climbing out her bedroom window and running into the neighbouring woods. There was someone deep in the forest whom she urgently needed to talk to. And that person that she needed to talk to was a young man called Mccool, who would later become the father of Fiona Mccool, Fiona the son of Cool and the son of Myrna. Now, there are many tales in this story, from the Grey of Lucra to the wild boar of Torc Mountain in the kingdoms of Kerry, from the hurlers of Donard to the dragon of Tara. But for this last extract that I'd like to read to you is from perhaps the most famous tale of Fiona Mccool, the Salmon of Knowledge, when Fiona is under the tutelage of the great poet Finnegas. Over the next month, Fiona grew more focused than ever. He continued to learn every morning before spending the afternoon hunting and gathering. Finnegas continued with his fishing expeditions, trying out new forms of bait Fiona developed to catch the salmon. They tried various woodland grubs, black truffles from the woodland floor and every other sort of mushroom. They even tried smelly stinkhorns, but stopped using them when Finnegas caught a pike that nearly chewed his ankle off. When they had tried every type of bait he could find on land, Fiona turned to the woodland streams for ideas. He started with crayfish before turning to freshwater shrimp. There were several weeks of trial and error, mostly error, and they were starting to think that the salmon was either not hungry or not even at home. But one day, when Fiona was searching for new bait, he heard a call ring through the forest. Fiona! 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 Fiona could hear his name being called from deep in the dark wood. It was Finnegas, and it sounded like trouble. He threw down the afternoon's woodland bounty and bounded towards the shouts, drawing his dagger from his sheath. But as he burst into the clearing of Finnegas' home, Instead of being met by his arch enemy Gaul or a band of thieves, he was greeted by Finnegas holding the most enormous salmon Fionn had ever seen. "That's some pinkeen," Fionn joked. "This is no pinkeen. This here is the Salmon of Knowledge. We're having fish for dinner," Finnegas said as he laid the salmon down and began rekindling the fire. "I get some more firewood," said Fionn. "No, I will," interrupted Finnegas. "I've waited 7 years to taste this fish, and I'm not going to ruin it by burning it. You're the cook, but remember, whatever you do, don't eat any of it, because the first person who eats the salmon will receive all its wisdom," Fionn said. "You need not worry. I won't eat one tiny bit." In a very short time, the fire was roaring again. As the flames rose, Fionn skewered the fish and set it high enough above the fire that it didn't burn, but close enough that it soon began to cook. He slowly rotated the skewer, and the smell of roasting salmon soon filled the air. Fionn thought that some fresh herbs might go well with the meal. Leaving the fish for a moment, he ran to a spot nearby where some wild sorrel grew. However, by the time he returned with the herbs, he saw that a blister had formed on the fish where it had been left over the flames for a moment too long. At first he let it be, but in each rotation the blister grew. Fionn reached across to puncture it with his thumb. "Ow!" "What is it?" said Finnegas, who had just arrived back to the camp with firewood. He laid the wood down and approached Fionn, but his look of concern turned to alarm when he saw Fionn sucking his thumb. Something in the boy looked different. "I went to get some herbs, and when I returned, a blister had formed on the fish," Fionn said. "It kept growing bigger, so I went to burst it, and it burned your tongue." Fionn saw the fear in the old man's face. "I didn't eat anything, I just burned my thumb and I..." But at the moment, they both knew. Fionn could feel a greater sense of awareness coursing through his veins. He was still a boy, but he now felt older. Finnegas saw it in his eyes, and the dread the old man had felt melted into relief. Maybe this was why it had taken him so long to catch the salmon. "I'm sorry, Finnegas," Fionn whispered. "Don't be," the old poet replied. "It makes sense that it is you who has this wisdom. After all, if you succeed in your attempt to lead the Fianna, you will need to be wise beyond your years to steer them through the years ahead. Now, you must return to Crimmel and the rest of your kinsmen in the west. You must gather as many people as you can to aid and protect you against Gaul and his men. And then you need to return to Tara and become the champion of the Fianna. That is your destiny, Fionn." As Fionn looked to the ground, saddened that once again he was to bid goodbye to another friend, Finnegas continued, "Don't feel too downhearted. It could be worse. You could have burnt it. Now, you better finish cooking so we can eat. You'll need strength as well as wisdom for what lies ahead." If you enjoyed listening to the tales of young Fionn and you'd like to read more, then keep an eye out for him on the shelves of your local bookshop as he evades the capture of evil Gall MacMorna. Thanks for joining, and keep on reading.